Morning, friends. I trust you're having a nice day. Here in the country, it's a beautiful day. The breeze is blowing, the weather's nice, and it's time to dig sweet potatoes. So, took the camera up the garden this morning, took a few pictures of Darlene digging sweet potatoes. Here, I'll show it to you. This is, days are getting shorter. It's time to dig treasure out in the garden. So my wife is this morning digging in just a bunch Puerto Ricans, it's called. Here's a little close-up of what she's pulling out of the ground. That'll be very much appreciated as we have sweet potatoes a couple times a day maybe in the winter. So this is it. This is the sweet potato patch. You never know what you're going to unearth. It's digging for treasure. In 2 Corinthians 4:7 it says we have this treasure in earthen vessels. This is not the kind of treasure that Paul was writing about, but this is nonetheless treasure that God has given to us, put in our garden. We harvest it, but He gets credit for the increase. So my wife has been digging for a few days. There's a few days left to go, but you know, people that were mining for gold, they didn't mind the effort because they figured they were going to get some riches out of it. Same with Darlene. This is my wife getting the food ready for winter. Darlene is digging for gold. Heart of gold, sweet potatoes. This is some of the treasure we've collected. Well, it's more like Darlene. Man sent me an email one time that said, put down that camera and help Darlene work. Well, the problem is she won't hold the camera, so one of us has to. They're the treasures this morning. This is not the kind of treasure you find in the bank. This is the only kind of treasure that you find out under the ground. It's free, takes some effort to attain it, but it comes with a book full of lessons to the gardener that is open-minded, and the Lord will teach us in the garden many lessons to be learned from the school of digging sweet potatoes. And we're going to pull out some vines because those roots down below the soil, this is where you find the gold. A little peek there, took a little peek around, didn't you?
You were finished.
Huh?
Thought you were finished.
So friends, that's digging in the gold mine for sweet potatoes. Here, I give you a picture of one. This is a Georgia Jet. Isn't it beautiful? It really tastes good. So it's a real blessing to dig under the dirt, and then Darlene pulls one of these jewels out, and she just is so surprised. It's a miracle, really, how you plant a little sweet potato slip, and then a few months later, you get big sweet potatoes. Anyway, I've adjusted my thinking. You know, it says in Romans 12:2, be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, that transformation, we can't do it, God does, but it changes the way we think. That means it changes what we value. If you'd asked me 40 years ago about treasure, I would have said it's money in the bank, it's a nice car, it's a nice apartment, it's the silver and gold of this world. But you know, I got a certain amount of that, but it never made me happy. It almost seemed the more I got, the more miserable I was. But you go to today, you know, today, you ask me what treasure is today, I say it's simple. It's having a faithful wife, it's relationships, it's good food on the table, it's the work we put our hands to, it's the labor that we engage ourselves in. These are the simple things of life. You know, the peace, the security, the trust. These things you can't put a price on. You can't buy it. And so my idea of treasure today is very different from back in the olden days. But when I came to the Bible, I read Luke 17:32. It says, remember Lot's wife. You know, Lot had gotten out of Sodom. But boy, there was something drawing her back. You know, she looked back, she just, something, that invisible cord that connects you to the city, it drew her, and she looked back. And of course, that was kind of the end of her. Although her body had come out, her heart was still there. Same happened to Darlene and me. I think when we came out of Atlanta, we'd gotten into the country, there were many, many blessings, especially as we engaged in the gardening and we're building a house. The baths down in the creek, the food Darlene was making, it was really good. But there was something that was calling to the carnal heart. When I say the carnal heart, I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it's the heart that has not been changed. It's a secular perspective. And it's something was calling to us. We had one foot in the country, but we still had one foot in Atlanta. And we'd go back and visit my mother from time to time. And maybe, once a month for a long weekend, and do the things that people do in the city. Now, the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal, when you break that commandment, it's a progressive disease. And I have that disease. My history as a thief started back when I was in, even before elementary school. I would go into the church. It was a couple of doors down, big Presbyterian church. I'd break into the window, steal money from the Coke machine. And again, when I say progressive disease, it means it just gets worse and worse. If you don't do something to reverse it, to halt it, then it just gets worse and worse. So as the years passed by, I was progressing toward, the penitentiary. That's where I would end up. And so Darlene and I, we got out to the country, but I would go back into the city. And in the city, I would do the things that I did there before. And I remember we had been in the country about a year, going back to the city, and I had done something there that was, I was breaking the law, and I got caught. And the police took me, handcuffed me, and that's the first time I'd ever been caught. I was handcuffed, thrown in the back of a police car, took me down to the jail, and then they processed me through the jail. And then what that involves is that back in those days, it was real ink and real fingerprints. Today, it's all digital. They just scan your fingertips. But you went back in the olden days, they put ink on your fingertips, they take your fingerprints, and I was sitting there kind of terrified, in my early 20s, kind of terrified about the whole scenario of going to jail. The guy that was doing my fingerprints, he looked at me, just a young guy, he looked at me, and he said, it's not going to be so bad, it'll be okay. Just encouraged me. I never forgot it. And I also never forgot when they put me in the cell. Put me inside a jail cell, slammed the door behind me. By the way, people love freedom. Men were made in God's image, and they were made to be free moral agents, and they love to have freedom. They love their choice. And when that door slammed shut, my freedom was taken away. And I was in the cell with one other man. There was a toilet sitting in the middle of a small cell. I was in there with another man, and I was feeling pretty desperate at the time. Now, I wasn't a Christian, didn't know Christ, didn't pray, and I was now in jail. The treasure, there's a verse in the Bible, it's Luke 12:34. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And it's kind of a sobering thought to think that if your treasure is in the bank or a safe deposit box, or you see it out there in your car, that's where your heart is. Because that's not a good place for your heart to be, because these things are temporal. I think it's 2 Corinthians, I can't remember the verse in 2 Corinthians, we look not at the things which are seen, because the things which are seen are temporary. All these things are temporary. 2 Corinthians 4:18, I think. All these things are temporary. But we look at the unseen, because the eternal things, they never pass away. And to develop vision for that which you can't see, to 2 Corinthians 5:7, walk by faith and not by sight. Only God can do that for us. And so as I was sitting there in a jail cell, not knowing what to do, the thought finally came to me, I need to get bailed out. To be able to put up bail to get out, you got to have something of value. I didn't really have anything of value. And I called my mother. Now, I had dishonored my mother. The fifth commandment is to honor your mother and father. I had dishonored my mother from, I guess, about the day I was born. I was an abusive, belligerent son. I had in no way treated my mother with any respect, and that's who I called. I was desperate, called my mother, and when she answered the phone, I told her, I said, look, I'm in jail. She said, you're where? And I said, I'm in jail. And I said, I can't get out unless somebody posts bond. And my mom was not we were just maybe just a little lower middle class, didn't have a lot of money. My mother came down to the jail, put up for a bond the title to her home. My father was dead at this time. All my mom had was this small house, and didn't have a lot of money. Worked in a nursing home as a nurse's aide. Came down and put up the title for her house for my bond that would get me out of jail. And I got in the car with Mom, started driving home, and we had a heated discussion about what I'd been doing, what was happening to me in my life. And I'm afraid to say I was not very kind to my mother, even after what she had just done for me. Now, the reason I share that story is because God used that in a very, very interesting way later on in my life. 10 years later, I would have that brought back to my memory when I was sitting in a church. That experience that I went through in my early 20s, it really helped me in my mid-30s as I entered into Christian service. So I think I know that God uses everything in our lives. Even before we know Him, we have experiences. He'll use those experiences to help us, not to hurt us. And so, dear friends, I've recalibrated, by God's grace, my thinking has been recalibrated. I didn't do anything. John 15:5, without me you can do nothing. The gravity of truth, it settles into the soul. And you see, without God, you can't make a change. Without God, you can't change direction in a permanent way. I mean, we might do something for a selfish motive. A lady might stop smoking because she wants her skin to look young. And that's a good reason to stop. I mean, there's a higher and a better reason. But, I'm not saying that these selfish motives don't sometimes result in a good decision. But as far as a lasting, permanent change of direction in our thinking in all aspects of life, that does not come from the internal workings of the heart. That comes from God. And so the Lord gave me some help there. In my experience when I was in jail, I know He had that young man give me some encouragement. I didn't know God. That young man probably didn't either. But nevertheless, it was an encouragement to me that I never forgot. 10 years later, God would bring it to my mind. But that experience in jail, it didn't change me. The problem is with fear factors, with bribery, with being, all these different motives, for greed, for position, all the different motives that we use, force and favor, they don't work. They don't work. The only motive I've ever seen that worked in my life or anybody else's is the motive of love. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 1, though I speak with the tongues of angels and have not charity, and I become a sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. Then verse 8, love never faileth. Love is a motive that will not fail you. And until your perspective is colored by the love of Christ, this is the treasure that we'll always seek, which is the money in the bank, the big car, the fancy house, all these things. But when Christ changes your vision, gives you 20/20 spiritual vision, well, I'm not saying mine's 20/20, but I want it to be. I'm more in focus now than I was in the beginning. When Christ gives you the keen spiritual vision, when He begins to open your eyes, it's like the blind man in John 9. He opened that man's eyes and he could see. Then we see that the eternal things are of lasting value. It's really what gives peace in the heart. John 14:27, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives it. The world can't give it to you. And dear friends, the world can't take it away. So now the lasting treasure, it's out there in the garden. It's growing in the ground. It takes some effort to cultivate sweet potatoes. But my dear friends, when that Georgia Jet comes out of the ground, now this is the true treasure. So this is part one of my jail experience. Part one is a kind of a dismal way to start, but the Lord gave me a blessing, and He pulled out of a tremendous defeat. He pulled a victory out of it. And that seems to be God's business, to bring a blessing out of a curse, to bring victory out of defeat. So God bless you, my friends. I hope your day is going along well. And remember, if you're not, heart to heart with Christ, dear friends, His heart is with you. And He wants to use every experience in your life to help you to gain an interest in Him and His work which is to give you the desire of your heart. God bless you, my friends. You have a nice day.